Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be doing a follow-up to the previous one that I did about Bubble's privacy rules. And the main reason that I'm doing this is because in response to that previous video I had some comments and people asking questions, and one person asked me a question about, well, okay, separating your data out into different SaaS, end customer accounts is great, but what about if within those SaaS customer accounts that you've also got sort of different company data, different types of data that you want to separate out as well? Can you use privacy rules for those as well? So it touched a nerve because that's exactly what I do, but I didn't want to put it in the video because I didn't want to muddy the water. So in this one we're going to be covering that really as a follow-up to the previous one. But what I want to do, because it can get a little bit complicated just explaining it, just me talking. So I've put together a few slides and let's just see if this works. So let's go back to the beginning and we'll also cover what we did in the last video as well. So if you remember, if you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link, by the way, somewhere around this video so that you can see that, and definitely it's worth watching. But in terms of the principles of what we were doing is that you basically in your app, your Bubble app, you have a SaaS account table, a SaaS account data type, okay? And that stores your core SaaS account customer info. So for example, the name of the account, if you've got multiple plans, what plan that they're on, an expiry date, billing information, how many users they're allowed, how many companies are allowed, if you're going to follow what we're going to talk about in a little bit. So that just stores that, that's the header of your SaaS customer account. And then obviously we've got a user. So a user has a link to a SaaS account. So a user is assigned to a SaaS account. But obviously the real benefit to that is that you can have multiple users per SaaS account. So a SaaS account may be for a particular company who has 2, 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 different users using the system, using your app. And they all need to access the same data from the SaaS account. And to actually, if you remember from last time, is that we set up a field on the user called SaaS account, and then that links to the SaaS account that it's assigned to. And then we have a simple privacy rule on the user type, which is this user's SaaS account is current user's SaaS account. Remember that current user represents the user that is logged in, okay? So this basically means that only users that are sharing the same SaaS account as the user that's logged in will be shown to whoever's logged in, okay? Now obviously then you can do different rules about who can see what pieces of information. So maybe you don't want user A seeing all of the information of user C, and again you can set up admins, and we covered that in a little bit in the last video as well. So then you've got your main data of your app. So here I've just got a few examples of transaction, vendor and inventory. So what we need to do then is to make sure that they just get limited for the SaaS account. Now, in this slide, I'm just showing you that they're linked to a user, and that's fairly straightforward to do in Bubble using this type of privacy rule here for the inventory. So you can say this inventory's creator is the current user, because Bubble gives you a field called creator, which when you write a record, write an inventory, write a vendor, whatever, it will store the user that created that record as the creator. So therefore this privacy rule means that only the user that created that record can actually see it. Well, in a SaaS environment that's not really any good, because we need user A and user C to see that, not just user B. So therefore we need to change that behavior, and as we covered in the last video, the way we do that is we point to the SaaS account. So rather than using the creator of the record, we have these fields on each data type for SaaS account, and then when we create them we will need to do it manually because Bubble doesn't create these for us. This is our creation. And so for each data type we have a field for SaaS account, and then that points every record that you create back to the SaaS account. And then what we do then, as we explained in the last video, is you'd have a privacy rule like this that says, in the case of the inventory, is that this inventory's SaaS account is the current user's SaaS account. So that means that only records on inventory that belong to the same SaaS account that the current logged in users is assigned to, that their SaaS account they're assigned to, is visible. Everything else is invisible, so you don't get that cross-contamination of data between your end SaaS customers. And that's where we kind of got to last time. Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at how to move that sort of separation down a level into different companies. So we'll just go back to the beginning again. You've got the SaaS account, you've got multiple users, each one assigned to a SaaS account. And then we're going to introduce this element here, which is company. So we've got company A, company B, and they're hanging off the SaaS account. Notice that the users are not hanging off the company, they're hanging off the SaaS account, because you can have various different scenarios where multiple users are using different companies and can share different companies and whatever. And obviously you can go fairly deep into that. But what we're going to be covering here is how do we separate the data for inventory and vendors and everything per company rather than per SaaS account. Now obviously each company is assigned a SaaS account with a SaaS account field, just like the user is. And to make sure that only the companies on the selected SaaS account or the current logged in user SaaS account, we'd have a privacy rule like this. This company's SaaS account is the current user's SaaS account, and that makes sure that only the companies that belong to the logged in user SaaS account get shown. Okay, so now we get to these pieces of information here: the transaction, the vendor, and the inventory. Okay, now presently, as it stands, if we follow on from where we got to previously, these are all linked straight up to the SaaS account. Okay, they're not broken down by company, they're broken down by the SaaS account based on this field here. Okay, now if we want to break this down by company, that's not much good, because no matter what company you select, if we have this, you're going to see all data. Okay, so what we need to do is to get these pieces of information pointing at the actual company. Okay, and the way that we do that is, rather than have a SaaS account field on these data types, we actually have a company field on the data type, so that each time that you create a transaction or a vendor or an inventory or whatever else it is, rather than point directly to the SaaS account, you're pointing to a company that data belongs to. What you might be thinking is, well, if we remove the link to the SaaS account from these data types, then that means that we're kind of losing that link. Well, actually no, because this privacy rule on the company is making sure that only the companies that can be selected belong to the same SaaS account as the user. So if you can imagine, what's going to happen is that you're going to pop up something when the user logs in and say, which company do you want to use? And then they can select that, and then privacy rules make sure that the companies that they get available to select to use are only those that belong to this SaaS account. So that covers that quite nicely. Now, the only other thing that we've got to deal with this level of data separation anyway with our SaaS account is that the SaaS account on the user never changes. Okay, so we can rely that once a user is set up or it's invited to be part of it, then we know that it's never going to change. It's going to be different with the company, because you can select company A or you can select company B, and we need to know what do we check against. And so what we do is we store another field on the user called current company. So in other words, when they log in, when a user logs in, you're going to know the SaaS account because the SaaS account is assigned to them. You're then going to give them a list of companies that they can select from, and then this privacy rule on the company is going to make sure that only the companies that belong to that SaaS account are displayed. They're going to select it, and then when they select it, you're going to then assign it onto the user's record as the current company. And that's fluid, that can change. Okay, now you might think, well, just put that on custom states, but as we covered in the last video, custom states aren't available when you're setting up privacy rules, because a custom state is a client-side memory, if you like, and all privacy rules are applied on the server side. So that's why we have to assign it onto the actual user, and it makes sense, it's just more secure. So that's the way that we do that. So when we log in, we ask for a company, we store that company in the current company, and then what we can do then is then use that as the basis for all of our privacy rules. So for the inventory, we can say that this inventory's company is the current user's current company. And that way, we're moving everything away from the SaaS account and into the company level. So, all right, enough of the slides now. Let's get into Bubble and let's start seeing how we can do this. So we've got our data types here, and we've got user, which is linked to a SaaS account. and I've added a new one called company, okay, and that is also linked to a SaaS account, as we explain when we're going through the slides. However, these other types, which is business entity, which is for customers and suppliers, at the moment it's still linked to the SaaS account. Transaction is still linked to the SaaS account. So basically, when we want to see these two pieces of information, they're not broken down by company. Okay, so all we need to do with that one is to add the company as a field. So we can just specify the company as the type. We now don't need the SaaS account because we're not really going to link to that. We're basing it around the company, but we'll leave it there for now. And the same with the business entity, which is for customers or suppliers or vendors. And again, we can just call this field company. It's going to be linked to company. Okay, and that's what we need to do then. Now, obviously, in the workflows, as we're adding data, rather than popping the SaaS account, although you can still do that as well, but it's kind of redundant. What you can do then is to say, well, whatever the company that's being used, you can store that, and however many data types that you've got in your application, you're going to need to do that for every single one. Obviously excluding the SaaS account and the user, because the user isn't linked to a particular company, and the SaaS account is its own thing. That's the header. So I mean, what you can do with users is you can say a list of companies that this user has got access to. So we could have a companies field there, or you could have that on company, so you could have users to let you know which users have got access to this company. We're not going to cover that in this, but those are options that you can use. So the idea then is that we've got a privacy rule applied here, so let's have a look at that. And so this is for company, so we can say this company's SaaS account is the current user's SaaS account, and then they can have everything again. If that rule is not met, then we don't give them anything, because obviously we don't want other SaaS customers to be able to access, anybody else's data. So we've got that set up there. So I've removed now the previous privacy rules that we had in place for the transaction on the business entity, because they were based on the SaaS account. So what we can do there is we can define a new rule, and this time we'll call it a company rule. Okay, and again, that's good. So what we can do there is we can say that this business entity's company is current users. Okay, now what are we going to check that against? How are we going to deal with that? And again, we come back to what we discussed before, which is how do we know what is the current logged in company in order to create this privacy rule? Okay, because it's not the SaaS account, it needs to be a company. And that's what I was saying before, is to create a field on the user for current company, which then stores which company the user is presently dealing with. So we can create a new field there, current company, and we will set that to a company. And then we can go back here and we can finish this privacy rule off. Current users, current company. Okay, and that way the only data that you'll see for business entities, which is for customers, suppliers, etc., will be any records that belong to the current users company that they're presently using. And the same with transactions, we can define that company. So all we're doing is we're unhooking the data from the SaaS account and hooking it up to the company instead. So then we can say that this transactions company is current users, current company. Okay, so we make sure I've set that right. Yep, I have. So again, it just means that the only transactions we're going to see in a session are going to be those related to the user's logged in company. Okay, so obviously we need a mechanism to be able to on the user to set that current company up. Okay, and we'll go through that in a second. Now obviously the data that we've got in here, let's just have a look at the transactions. We've got quite a few in there. I'm not linked to any company at the moment because we haven't created them. In fact, I'm not even sure I've got any company. I've got a few companies set up. So what we've got here with these companies is we've got two companies that belong to the same SaaS account because they've got the same SaaS account ID, and we've got one that belongs to a different one. So we need to populate the transactions and the business entities with the actual company that they belong to in order to see the data. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll pause this here, I'll go away and populate that so that at least we can show an example. Okay, so filled in the company IDs in here so that we've got some details to work with. So what I'll do is in here, this I just want a label to display the current company. So what I'm going to do is just insert dynamic data. And what I want to do is to say the current user's current company's name. Okay, and that way I'm just displaying whichever company is selected there. Okay, so generally what you would have to do then is to have a way that when the user first logs in, that they are presented with the companies that they can select. So what we will do then is we have a page which is a login page. Now at the moment we've just got a login button here. Now in a standard login page, obviously you'll have your email address and you'll have your password, and then they can click login, but we're not going to be building out a full login system because we're just going to rely on using run as for our users. So the idea is that we'll run that and then we'll come across this, we'll just click to log in. So if we just look at the workflow that we've got on this just shows a pop-up. Okay, so let's just have a look at that pop-up. Okay, now as you can see, this has just got a repeating group on it that's got a list of companies. So let's have a look at that. So it's just a straightforward list of companies. There's no constraints on it because we're going to rely on the privacy rules dealing with that for us. And then the idea is that the user clicks a company that they want to select, and let's have a look at the workflow on that. When you click that, is it that then sets a state, a custom state on the pop-up called _selected_co, which then stores the current sales company. So that company gets stored into the custom state. And so what will happen then is when they click OK, so look at the workflow, this is what really does the work. So this is where we're going to make the change to the actual user and put the current company on there. And so what we're going to do is when they click on a company, it stores that company into the custom state, and then we assign that custom state, which is the company they've selected, into current company, and then make that change. So at this point then it's written back to the database. We're then going to hide the pop-up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add a pause before the next action, and we're just going to put a quarter of a second, 250 milliseconds as a pause. And the reason that we're going to do that is purely a little bit of a hack, but essentially when we make the change to the user, that's obviously got to go to the server. And if we don't have a pause on that, this is going to happen so quick that when we go to this page, there's no guarantee that change, because it's gone to the server, and there's no guarantee it's sort of reflected back again in that amount of time. But you just give it 250 milliseconds, which to us is nothing, but in computing terms and the speed of transmission of data, that's quite a while. So we can do that as well. There are ways around that. So we can force Bubble to, if you like, make sure that it waits until something has happened. The couple of ways to do that: one is to have something that's called on a custom workflow or a custom event, which makes sure that Bubble makes sure that finishes everything it needs to do before it moves on. Or the other thing is to actually reference this. So as you know, when you create an action, let's say I'll just select that we're going to set a state, for example, just purely as an example, is that you can assign the result of step 1. Now when you assign the result of step 1 in a workflow, Bubble recognizes that, and it will make sure that the workflow does not complete until it knows that the server has completed the process, because it knows it has to refer to it further on the workflow. If you don't reference that elsewhere in the workflow, it just carries on. So we just put that pause so we can avoid that. Make sure we got a slight delay. So the fourth step is to go to the app page, which is where we're going to display our data, and that pause just makes sure that the update's gone to the server, and we've come back again recognizing that that's the new current company that we need. Okay, so that's the only reason that we add the the pause in there. So if we then go back to our app page, then obviously that's when we get this information based upon the customer that they set in the login. Now, one other thing I just want to mention with that is when you click login and it immediately then goes to, it pops up it shows the pop-up straight away. And I've put a condition on this one just to demonstrate this so that you know, because you don't always want to show the pop-up. In fact, if you can avoid showing the pop-up, which is another step that the user's got to take, then you should. Obviously, circumstances dictate that they have to not select a company, but let's say there's only one company, or let's say that the user has a default company set, and that's something that you can set up as well on the user. So in our data, what I've got on the user as a default company, I added this outside of the video, so that's the reason it's just popped in there. But you can add a default company. So let's say we go on our login page in our pop-up. So let's say that at the bottom here somewhere, that when they select a company, we can put a little checkbox to say, do you want to set this as the default company, as your default company? And that way, what we can do then is that rather than show this pop-up, we can just go, once they've logged in, straight into the system using that company, and then obviously they can select something different elsewhere. But at least that avoids this step if it's necessary. And the other way, obviously, is that where we do a search for company, count is greater than 1, so we're only showing the pop-up if there's more than one company. So obviously if you've only got one company, you don't want to do that. Okay, so that's just something to consider. We won't go into it here, but that's just something to consider. We'll just remove this condition so it's not interfering. I just wanted to highlight that as something that maybe you can do to avoid showing the pop-up if they've set a default company or there's only one company in there anyway. So I'll clear that expression and we will run as a user and click login, and then we get the pop-up that just shows out the two companies that we've got for this particular SaaS account. So select that one. Again, what's happening in the background, that's assigning it to the custom state, and then when we click OK, that's going to write that to the database as the user's current company, and there we get the company we've selected and the customers and the transactions that are assigned to that. If we do that again and run as again, we do the same thing, logging in. This time we select this company, click OK, and then we get the other company listed. So what we do have, we have another user here which is linked to a different SaaS account which has only got one company on there. So this is where perhaps it's great if you can just avoid showing this pop-up because there's only one. And so what you could do with that one is to say, well, just immediately assign that one that's in there. We're not going to cover this, that'll just take too long. So, but okay, same thing. There's no data for this one, but at least it'll show the company that's being selected. And because that's a different SaaS account, obviously you get different options. So the few things that I could go through here, one of those is to do with privacy rules related to, let's say for example that you want a situation whereby the user can access more than one company's data at a time. So let's say you run in some kind of consolidation or something in that nature, then you provided you set your data rules up correctly, then you could also put those on privacy rules. The way that I would generally do that is to, on the user, is to have a field that's called session companies or something, and then that would be a list of companies. For each one, I would then build the privacy rules around the lists to see if it contains, if the current users, session companies are contained within the for that existing user, and that's probably the way that I would do that. A little bit too deep for this video, maybe I might go into it in a future one, but I hope that that's been useful for you. I hope I've explained it correctly and I've not lost anybody. It's fairly straightforward. We're just removing the dependency from the SaaS account to the company. It's just a little bit more involved mainly because the user, rather than this SaaS account which is static, once it's set is static, Obviously the current company can be set, and then that can be changed anytime that they want to do that. That's the only sort of moving piece really that's significantly different. But anyway, listen, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please like if you've got anything out of this video, subscribe if you want to see more content. I'll be doing more fairly soon. And yep, have a great day and take it easy.